Okay, so this is going to be formal from now on. Okay. So, hi everybody. Welcome to Press Start. Press Start is the colloquium of the Kedar Game Center at Shenkar College in Tel Aviv. A colloquium means that this is a place for us to explore and talk about specific subjects. So this series deals with the ability of games to promote social innovation. I'm Vered Pnueli. I'm the head of the Masters of Game Design at Kedar Game Center at Shenkar College. With me is Asi Borak, who's going to join us in a few minutes. Asi is the SVP at Tilting Point Game Company, chairman at Games for Change, and a lecturer at the Masters for Game Design at Shenkar. And Dr. Renard Glusman. Say hi, Renard.
Hello.
Yeah, a game designer and a senior lecturer at the Kedar Game Center. Our guest today is Rami Ismail. Do I say it right? Rami Ismail?
Rami Ismail. Both of them work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. No, it's so much easier for me to say Rami Ismail.
Right.
This is the way we pronounce it, so that's
right.
much better.
Exactly.
So Rami Ismail is, for those of you who don't know him, although I must say, Rami, that so many people here know you, and I was extremely excited to have you here. But for the few of you who don't know Rami, is a Dutch-Egyptian independent game developer with over 20 titles across PC, console, web, and mobile. His development of tools and games and his prolific and popular public speaking have helped to shape industry opportunities for game communities around the world. This is exactly what we read about you, Rami, and it's so true. In 2015, Rami and his partner were featured in Forbes 30 Under 30. In 2018, he received the Ambassador Award from the Game Developers Choice Awards. Variety and GamesIndustry.biz named Ismail one of the most influential and People of the Year in video games. So we're very honored to have you here, Rami.
It's my pleasure.
In this meeting, we would like to learn what made Rami Ismail what he is today and what motivates him. I know it's hard to hear about yourself in third person, but we're all gamers, so it's really easier for you.
Right.
We are 3 interviewers. So I'm going to start, and then Renard is going to follow. Yeah. Yes, and then Asi.
And then Asi.
And then we will leave some time for the audience to ask some questions, and then we will wrap it up with our 10 questions format.
Okay.
Rami, if you're ready, yes, it's gonna be thorough.
Okay, well, let's go.
Let's
do
go.
this.
Yes, take a deep breath. So we're gonna start from the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about your childhood, when and where you were born?
Right. I was born in the Netherlands in 1988, which makes me
very young.
32, I think. I'm not sure anymore. Time has become meaningless. I was born in a little village called Alphen aan de Rijn, which is in the sort of southwest of the Netherlands. Wasn't a big city, wasn't quite a rural town, it was somewhere in the middle, if you know the type. My dad had just started a job as a teacher in the Netherlands, because for the 7 to 10 years before that, he had been an illegal immigrant in the Netherlands. He had moved here from Egypt in his early 20s, and because he met my mom, he ended up staying here. Sadly, that also meant that in the Netherlands, in Egypt, he had dodged draft, which meant that he wasn't allowed to go home for 10 years as well, which meant he missed a lot of major events in his family's life, which was really sad for him. My mom was grew up in the Netherlands. Actually, funnily enough, my grandmother was Frisian, which is a separate sort of part of the Netherlands that speaks their own language and has its own history. So I kind of grew up like many cultural, sort of automatically.
What language did you speak at home?
So a little bit of both, honestly. I was raised in Arabic and Dutch, and then I learned English from my what my parents would always call my third parent, which was the computer that my dad got when I was 5 years old, because I would not care about anything as long as I was near that computer. I was probably a pretty annoying kid, to be honest. I was very curious. I was very inquisitive, and I didn't really accept anything from anybody. There's this amazing document when I got married. I don't know if this is common for you as well, but my dad is Egyptian, and he has this suitcase with all the important papers in case something happens to him or he passes. And it's like, nobody in the Netherlands has heard of this suitcase. So I'm just always curious if other cultures have the suitcase. My dad has a suitcase.
An immigrant suitcase, just in case he needs to.
Right, he needs to go. Yeah. Right,
Yes.
or something happens to him, or whatever. And he took some papers from the suitcase from when I was a kid, when I got married, because I was married a few years ago, and it was a government report, a government agency report for children's healthcare or mental health care, because I was a weird kid. Curious, inquisitive, using too complex language for his age, and sort of not isolated, but definitely different enough in the classes I was in. And the report said, Rami staged a mutiny today because at the end of the exercise with a group of other children, we give them a cookie. And Rami convinced the entire class to refuse participation in the exercise unless we got the cookie first. And my dad always said that was the moment he knew I was trouble, but also that I had potential to be.
How old were you when this happened?
I was 5.
Oh, goodness.
So they basically said that I had a potential for leadership, but that it could easily turn destructive if it was not guided well over the course of my life. So that has been my parents' major challenge throughout my early years, I think. But yeah, that was kind of the kid I was. I was spending a lot of time behind the computer, trying to learn English, trying to figure out what this magical device was doing. And then socially, I was just annoying to anybody with authority that was supposed to lead my life in a good direction.
Okay, sounds like a good start.
Right.
Yes. Well, we've read a few articles about you, and I was wondering if you could say, what did you learn from your parents? If you can sum it up a little.
Right. I think my dad mostly taught me, because my dad was an illegal immigrant and he did not get good work, right? He carried wood to the point where his knees and back are still destroyed 35 years later. And eventually he got the opportunity to get a real job and to get a proper job, a job that was paid instead of money under the table. And he had a lot of options. He's an economics major, so he's capable, and he could have gotten an incredible job.
Where did he graduate? It's in Egypt? Or
in Egypt. Okay. Yeah, in Egypt.
And they didn't recognize it. Okay.
Yeah, they didn't. I mean, they didn't. Back then, they didn't recognize anything from anywhere that wasn't Europe. That was it. It was not a great time for Dutch tolerance. But instead of any of that, he decided to become a teacher because he hated how he was taught Dutch. He thought there was no consideration for people from other cultures, people with different backgrounds, people that don't use the alphabet. And he said, I'll do that better. So he became a teacher. And it's not the best paying job he could have picked, but it's the most impactful job he could have picked. And he has always stood by that, even though we never had much money. He always said that he could help us as a family have a bit more money, or he could help 20 families have a life. And he always picked that second one, which to me it has always been the biggest lesson my father has taught me. My mother is, where my dad is very Egyptian in that he always said, Rami, you can be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer, or a disgrace to the family. Those are your 4 options.
It sounds like, various options.
No other options.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a game developer. My mom, I think, has always taught me to be very open-minded about what is, and to think a bit more carefully about what is and isn't right, and to not really let other people that define that for you, to think about those things, to think about what you want out of life, what value you want to add to other people's life, like who you want to be and how you want to be that. My mom has always been this quiet, very, very hardworking person that day in, day out, she would take care of us. My dad would work, late shifts because we didn't have much money. So she was always the one that took care of us day to day. And she would Monday to Friday, make breakfast, go to work, come back, make lunch, go to work, make dinner, come back from work, make dinner, keep us entertained for 2.5 hours. My dad would come home. She would make tea with milk and Dutch waffles. And we would go to bed. And then on Saturday, she would manage our soccer. And then on Sunday, she would take care of grandma. So I've seen my mother work all her life for everything. And then when Ridiculous Fishing came out, which was my first major hit game, and I earned a lot of money for the first time in my life, I asked my mom what I should buy her to thank her for that. And she said, the fact that you can buy me anything is enough thanks for all of that. That was the point. The point was that you can have opportunity in your life. And if that is successful, then I'm happy. And then I told her that that's not an acceptable answer, even though it's very cute and nice and I appreciate it. And so she asked me to get her an iPad so she could play my game.
That's perfect, because we wanted to ask you this because you kept talking about how you got your mom into games and also into Twitter. That's right. So how is it going?
Very well. Yeah. So my mom played a few mobile games, but I was traveling a lot at that point in my life. The past 10 years, I spent the majority of my life on the road, meeting developers around the world, everywhere. And so I wouldn't be home in the Netherlands very frequently. And when I would be home, my mom would really like to talk about how I was doing, but she didn't want to talk about my work, right? So she secretly started to follow games news. So she already knew what was happening, right? So I didn't have to spend hours explaining everything. I would just say Xbox and she'd be like, right.
Cool.
So
she was your biggest fan, yeah.
She was secretly learning a lot about the games industry. And I hadn't noticed until one day I said something like, oh yeah, I was visiting Phil. And she's like, which one? I'm like, what do you mean, which one? She's like, well, Tibetowski, Spencer,
Cool.
I'm like, how do you know all these Phils? And she's like, oh, your Facebook. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I haven't mentioned all 3 Phils on Facebook. She's like, I read the games news every now and then. I'm like, you read the games news to the point where you can tell me Phil Fish, Phil Tibetowski, and Phil Spencer are 3 different people. And she's like, yes. I'm like, okay, we're going to get you a video game.
Okay.
So we argued about.
It wasn't just about you; it was also about the industry.
Right? Yeah, she would, because that, in a way, that is me, right? Like what I've been doing for the past 10 years is I've been moving around different parts of the industry, trying to make them as fair as possible for indies. When things started, well, I'm sure if we're going through my life, I'm sure we'll get to this later, but that has sort of been my life, is the industry. So for mom to know what the industry was doing was really important to her. She eventually ended up, she likes Lord of the Rings, but those games are way too violent for mom. So we settled on Final Fantasy 15. She played that and she loved it. And since she's been playing games.
How old was she when she played Final Fantasy?
She was early 60s. And the majority of her playing Final Fantasy was amazing because A, she didn't know how the controls work, but also I think a lot of gamers don't realize that for most of our lives, we've been taught this language of video games. So when we come across somebody and they do a certain thing, we recognize it. But my mom sent me a message early on and she was like, Rami, she was in a point where she would call me with what happened in the game. And she was in the part where she was going to meet the bad guy of Final Fantasy 15. It's this very shady man, long black capes, a wing, like a one-winged angel kind of theme. Has a little discordant theme where it goes like dun 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 dun, where the last note is slightly off, hat is slightly diagonal. He cocks his head like this, so you kind of know he's probably trouble, right?
Yeah.
But those are all tropes. So I was like, is mom going to recognize that? So she sent me a call and she's like, Rami, I was playing the game today. Something weird happened. I'm like, what happened? She's like, well, I met this guy. He was quite shady. I'm like, tell me about him. She's like, well, he was wearing a black cape. I'm like, mm-hmm. I'm like, what else? She's like, well, I walked up to him and I said hi, and he just tried to sell me guns. I'm like, what? She's like, he tried to sell me guns, so I ran away. I'm like, no, that's a shopkeeper, mom. That's a shop. Like, you can just, he's safe. Like, that's not a problem. And for her, a random stranger on the street going like, hey, you want to buy weapons? Was like, yo, I'm out of here. Well, to me, that's like, let's see if there's some upgrades, right? And that just kept happening. She would come across a cracked wall in a building, and I'd be like, treasure. And she would be like, oh, this building doesn't look stable. Should I get out? Is this dangerous? Can I die? And it's so the correct response, right? It's obviously the correct response to that situation, but we've been taught not to see that anymore.
Right.
That's been fascinating to me.
Yeah, this is wonderful. That's a wonderful example because you actually grew up into gaming, you know.
Right.
So you're like game literate, you know.
Right.
People who don't know about this, you keep seeing like older people when they get into games, they just like stand in the room and they say, okay, now what?
Right.
You know? And they say, okay, now walk. You know? So,
right.
Yes,
yeah,
that's an interesting example.
By now, she's played so many games. She's played Dragon Age. She's played God of War. She's played Nier Automata. She's played Persona 5.
Wow.
She's now playing Ghost of Tsushima. She's at year 3 or 4
what a gamer.
of gaming by now. She keeps playing. I think next
and Rami, is she finishing the games? Is she taking the?
Yeah, the only game she didn't finish was Ratchet and Clank.
Okay.
She didn't care for Ratchet and Clank.
And she plays normal or easy? What does she play?
She kind of varies. So in games where she can manage it, I try to put it on normal, but usually there's some sort of aim assist because the sticks are still really complicated for her. It's still a lot. So she's been playing. I think she's playing Ghost of Tsushima on easy at the moment because it's a very parry-based game.
Yeah, it becomes very tough.
Right. So it's on easy, but she's loving the game, and I think is going to be her first platinum trophy, which she's very excited about. She has no idea what it means, but I explained it to her once that if she gets everything in the game, she'll get a platinum trophy, and now she wants it. So
sounds like it's very fun on your dinners.
Right. It is. Yeah. Yes. When I visit, it's a little bit of how's the family? How are you? And then so what happened in the game? It's been nice.
Fantastic. So you told us what kind of kid you were in preschool. I wonder what kind of kid you were in school after you've told everybody to take the cookie first.
Right.
Can you just describe this kid?
Probably not very different from that. I got extremely fortunate. I've long believed that teachers are some of the most important people in society. And the reason I believe that is because of one specific teacher I had when I was growing up. His name was Meester Robert. He's retired a few years ago. And I went to his retirement because that man had a massive impact on how I turned out, I think. He realized that I wasn't being annoying. I was just being bored, right? Which is quite a valuable distinction because I've also had teachers that assumed I was annoying. And those were some of the worst years of me as a kid. But this man, the first man that ever taught me in preschool, because it was class 1 when I was 5 or 6 years old, 5 years old. He decided that instead of trying to fit me in the curriculum as they had it at school, they would start extracurricular activities for effectively me. So he set up a chess program and made it available to everybody. And he set up a computer program. They had one computer at school and they set up those 2 programs. And I learned how to play chess and I learned more computer stuff because at home we had a very old DOS computer. This one had Windows 3.11 and ski-free, which was great. But if you draw back, I don't really believe that you can see where things are going in life, but you can trace things back to moments. I'm a game designer / programmer, and if you ask me where that started, it was playing chess and working on that computer was when those things started coming together, when I realized games have rules. And he would do things like tell us to play chess without pawns, right? We would play chess without pawns. Or like, what if you flip the order of the pieces? Or what if you can randomly place the pieces? Or he would create these little games and we would come up with these rules. The horses can jump twice, the knights, or whatever.
You were modding. You were doing modding for chess. Yeah.
We were effectively modding. I had no idea what modding was, but that would be my life for the next like 15 years would be modding. But I was playing games and like learning to understand these games. And the chess program did really well. That school still does that and has been champion of the province, which is our state equivalent, quite a few times. The first time when I was there. It has participated at like national level by now. But I think at elementary school, the thing that got done right is that program sustained through my entire time there. It sustains to this day. And because of that, even when I had bad teachers, I had somewhere to go, right? I had a place that was safe, that was mine, and it was games. It was video games on the computer and chess on a board. And when the man retired, it was funny because obviously I left that school when I was 11. When the man retired, I went back to the school to say hi to him. And he looked at me, he's like, Rami? I'm like, yeah. Like, you remember me? He's like, yeah, I'm not gonna, like, we did quite a lot of work to make sure you turned out okay. Did you turn out okay? I'm like, I don't know. Like, let me tell you about how my life is going. And afterwards, we sat there for like 15 minutes just talking. Afterwards, we went. I showed him some of the news articles about things that had happened, and he just looked at me. He's like, "Turned out okay." I'm like, "Thank you." And it was really reassuring. Yeah. It's really reassuring to hear that man say that I turned out okay, because in a way, he's sort of been the impetus for a lot of my journey. So
it sounds like you made him very proud. I bet.
I hope so. I will continue. I will continue to try.
So was there a certain point when you decided what you want to do when you grow up? Back then, probably not game design, but did you have any ambition?
I wanted to be a pilot.
Oh, okay.
I really wanted to be a pilot. And it's funny because I ended up traveling this much and actually ended up trying for my pilot's license, but then ended up flying too much to actually get it. It's been kind of a mess. I wanted to be a pilot, but back then there was this story that you couldn't become a pilot if you had glasses. So the day I got glasses, which is when I was 7 or something, I gave up on that dream. And I'd been programming a bit at that age already because there was modding really. So I just decided that I want to do this then. I didn't really realize I wanted to be a game developer. I just wanted to work with computers. That was it.
I'm thinking you were born in 1988, right? So what was your first game system? Just put us into context.
Well, I mean, the computer, an IBM 386, I think, or 286. I'm not quite sure which one it was.
What games did you play?
It had Grand Prix Circuit, which was was EGA, so GP EGA. Okay. We had Jump Joe, which was really bad, and we had Gorillas, which was the first game I modded because it was a tutorial file that came with QBasic. The first console I had was supposed to be a PlayStation, but my dad went to the black market, the Egyptian he is, and bought a Polystation, which was a modded NES in the shape of a PlayStation.
Okay.
Which was very disappointing because I'd spent all my birthday money on a PlayStation game that didn't fit because it wasn't a PlayStation. But
we have similar stories in Israel.
Right. It was fun because in the end it had 99 games. Well, it had 10 games and they were repeated 9 times, but with like ROM hacks. But it had like Mario, had like Contra, had Road Fighter. All of these like sort of NES classics. So he accidentally bought me access to 10 games instead of 1 game a year. I blew that one up by accident. The plug fell off, and I thought if you just have the wires, you can probably just put them in the socket. And it turns out you can't do that.
It sounds kind of dangerous, actually.
It really was, but also, like never let it be said that a kid won't go to extreme lengths to play their video games.
Yeah.
So yeah, I almost electrocuted myself and instead blew up the police station by accident. I still own it, and it's still a little charred. It's quite a thing.
I guess you're not playing with it anymore. So in 2008, you enrolled to Utrecht School of Art and Technology. Was there already a game design program back then?
Yeah,
there is now, and it's amazing.
Right. No, so the choice to study games came kind of late because I didn't know you could study games. Like I didn't realize you could study games. I was just making games.
Yeah.
Right. I was just making games at that point. I was doing some independent work for this company in the US who hadn't realized I was a 16-year-old kid. I'd been doing a whole lot of stuff in games at that point, but I had never realized that you can make it a career, right? Like a school career. And my dad really needed me to go to a school so he could like brag about it, but also like be sure that my future was okay.
You're under control.
Right. But he insisted that I study something, and then I found this game education. And we actually had two at that point already. We had the Utrecht School of Art and Technology, and the South we had the what was it called? The NHTV, the Nederlandse Hogeschool voor Toerisme en Verkeer, but International Game and Game Architecture and Design, I think was the name of or Architecture and Development. The USAT one, the one that I ended up going to, was actually almost 7 years old by the time I started. And they also had an offshoot for digital theater, which was also interactive. So they were actually quite advanced in the program at that point. I got a little unlucky in that the year I joined was the last year they had a certain curriculum, and the next year they flipped it, and they didn't quite know, it wasn't quite sure that the new curriculum was good. So instead of having a smooth ramp up, the second year was basically a carbon copy of the first year. And
it was under the computer science department, or was it under the media?
No, this is so the Utrecht School of Art and Technology is an art school, and they fall under, they do bachelors of art and technology and masters of art and technology. So I always fell under art. I was never a science class. So they focus pretty strongly on game design and team communication. Yeah, that was the two things. And then it turns out that we don't need that many designers. So they've sort of pivoted since. Like there's way too many game designers in the Netherlands. So they've been a little bit more focused on like rapid prototyping, beyond ideation, like, prototyping, production, stuff like that. So they're pivoting to what the world needs. But back then, everybody wanted to be a game designer. Everybody wanted to be the next John Romero, Cliff Bleszinski, Brando Romero, like whatever, like the big rock star names. I just wanted to make video games. I didn't really know about all these people. All I knew is that their names didn't sound like mine, and it felt unreasonable to think that my name would ever mean something like that, right? So I was just like, maybe I can make some games.
Right. So you broke some glass ceilings. That's great. Renat, I'm moving the torch to you, the microphone to you, and I'm gonna keep asking you at the end a few more questions, Rami.
Awesome.
But thank you so much. It was
no worries.
So interesting. Yes. So Renat, go ahead.
Yeah, Rami, I'm going to take you to the early years of your studios. So let's start by the fact that you actually dropped out. Dropped out in the year 2010.
Correct.
And founded where you found also your partner, right? Jan Willem Neyman. Right. And together you founded Vlambeer. So what is Vlambeer actually?
So to get the story straight, when the curriculum turned out to be the same second year as first year, I got really bored and I started this project. It was called Lens Flare, which is the least imaginative name ever, but also I was 20, so 18 or something. And we were making a space sim. I got together the best students of the school, 18 of them, which is way too big. And I actually got the game through the early greenlight process at Microsoft to launch it on Xbox Live Arcade, which for a 19-year-old was mind-blowing. because that's where the big games launched. So all of us were super excited to work on it. School, however, was less excited about it because they needed their students to participate in sort of like projects that they got from government, from outside companies. Those were their prestige projects. So they needed those 18 best students to work on those things instead of my thing. So they shut the project down because I made it at school. They had the right to do that. Anything that was made at school is owned by school. So I dropped out. That was really it. I went, well, if you're gonna do that, like this is a real opportunity for 18 of your students to have a commercial product on their portfolio before they leave school. If you're gonna block this, then clearly you do not have my best interest at heart. So I left. One of the people on that project I really didn't like. There was just one particular guy that I just really just couldn't get along with him. He was a super artsy kind of guy. He didn't believe in making games for money. He thought that was disgusting. And he would make these really small prototypes in like a day and then go like, this is good. And I'm like, this is not good. This is bad. This is like, it could be good, but as you've made it now, it's bad because you're not putting the work to make it good. So he also decided to drop out. And then we decided that, well, clearly he can start games pretty well. And clearly I know what is needed to finish a game. So what if we just do one game together? What if we do one game together so both of us have a portfolio piece? We'll put it on Xbox Live Arcade. And then we never talk to each other again because I don't like him and he doesn't like me. And so that's what we did. We created Vlaambeer. That guy was Jan Willem Nijman, who would be my business partner for 10 years after that. And we decided to make Super Crate Box, a tiny small game. We funded it by making another Flash game called Radical Fishing. And Vlaambeer was born as a studio that was meant to only make a few games, be very counterculture, have sort of a certain type of snarky humor to it, like irreverent almost. Very small arcade games. That was
what type of games they were, if you have to define, your first kind of games,
right?
Design-wise.
I think what Jan Willem really honed in on, and what I think really defined Vlaambeer for the years after, and was sort of our guiding star, is that we had 3 rules. The first one was we find the most elegant solution for every problem, right? So we don't want to add stuff. We want to cut away as much as possible. And the fewer rules we can have to get to a certain design, the better the design is. The second one was, if there is a button that you can press in the game, there needs to be a reason to not press the button. That was very important to us, that if there was a reason to shoot, there needs to be a reason to not shoot. If there is a reason to kill an enemy, there needs to be a reason to not kill an enemy. If there's a reason to keep a weapon, needs to be a reason to not keep a weapon. And the final thing is, and this is not something we knew how to define back then, but for us, the player journey was very important. So how does the player go through playing this game? For Radical Fishing, which was the fishing game, it was, no matter how bad you are at the game, you need to have a good time and be able to buy new upgrades. For Super Crate Box, it was, the game never gets harder, you get more tired. So the Super Crate Box never gets harder. You can play for 6 hours straight. If you have the focus to play high level for 6 hours, exact same game for 6 hours. You're fighting you. And the fact that we were defining player journey, even though we didn't know it back then, I think ended up a large part of Vlaambeer. You take those 3 design ideas, you mix it with the belief that nothing is good game design unless it communicates to the player. So juice is what we ended up calling it. The juiciness of how a game plays, the feel, the impact, the mobility, like how when you walk, you stop walking, the character doesn't just stop, it kind of slides a little. But when you start moving, it immediately starts moving, right? The sense of momentum, of kinetic energy, that was really important to Vlaambeer. So you take those 3 design rules, you top it with that idea, and then you get Vlaambeer. That's the studio. We didn't know it back in the day. we only defined that as we were making more games. We were trying to figure out, so what is it that we're doing? But if you trace it back, that was what we were doing.
If you know it only later on, you think that the knowing of what makes Vlambeer what it is helped you later on, or?
Yeah, later on it did. And I think at the start it doesn't. I think one of the interesting things about starting a creative collaboration is that there is no way to say what it's going to be. You can discuss it, but that doesn't, it's all theory at that point, right? You need the practice of figuring out what it is. It's the same thing for a game, right? You can theorize about how a game is going to be, but until you start implementing it, you've got no idea whether the game is good or interesting. Like you have wouldn't this be cool? And it's like, you try it and it's like, oh no, it isn't, right? Or, oh, it is, but not in the way I thought. So that sort of iterative process is not just in game design, it's also in running your studio. But I do think that if you're not properly post-mortem those things, if you're not properly like looking back, reflecting, seeing what's happening, why certain choices were made, that you're not iterating properly. Like that needs to be part of your process, is look back, what happened? Why did that happen? Not just for the bad things, but also for the good things.
You were creating quite a lot of games back then in 2011, right. 2012, and you were doing tremendously well, but you had some ups and downs, right? And
right.
You said in some place that the studio almost fell apart.
Right.
Why is that?
So for the first few years, we did really well. We released Radical Fishing and Super Crate Box. Super Crate Box was nominated for the Independent Games Festival Awards, which was this big showcase in San Francisco. Was also the first time I really started traveling. I had not been to any country besides the Netherlands, Egypt, France for 2 days to go to Disneyland with school, and Rome for a week to go to Rome with school. That was the only countries I've been to in my life. So now I was going to San Francisco.
You got out of Europe, yeah.
Right, yeah. Like Egypt was the furthest I got, and that was basically home. So it didn't really, like I was either home or in Europe. That was it. And I was going to San Francisco, so that was terrifying. But it turned out really cool. It turned out really nice. I met all these nice people, and it started sort of my career in public speaking, stuff like that. But that's a tangent. So Super Crate Box came out and did really well. We did a bunch of little free games, flash games, just to experiment. Luftrauser was one of them. We did a freeware game for a Kickstarter called Gun Gods that did really well. And at that point, this tiny company in Texas had reached out to us that they had bought the Serious Sam IP. And they wanted us to do a game. And they had just heard about this whole indie thing, that it was kind of a big deal. And they had reached out to us whether we wanted to make an indie Serious Sam game. And me and JW, we both love Serious Sam. Like since we were like kids, we've loved these games. So we really wanted to say yes, but also this was a foreign company that we didn't know, and they were talking about money. So clearly they were a bunch of suits that didn't care about game design, right? So we came up with the best idea ever. We didn't want to say no, because then 14-year-old us would be really angry at us. So instead, we came up with a perfect plan. The perfect plan was very simple. We're going to pitch the worst game idea. Just the worst game idea, and then they'll say no, right? And then we can continue with our lives. So Serious Sam is really fast. It's really aggressive, shooting game, like running all the time. So we said, we're going to make a turn-based RPG. And this company emailed back to us and said, you know what? You're the creative. If you believe that works, here's the money. Go for it. And we were like, well, we have to make this game. So I made Serious Sam the Random Encounter, and that was our first collaboration with the company that you now know as Devolver Digital. We kind of grew side by side with Devolver. We made our first money that way. And because we had some money, we decided, what if we take Radical Fishing, which was our first Flash game, and we turned that into an iOS game. iOS was starting to get big. Cannibal had just happened to sort of proven the space for indies. We said, what if we make the best iOS game ever made? Very ambitious. So we started on that, and we got a really good team together. Zach Gage, an incredible concept artist, conceptual artist is the right way to say it, not a concept artist. Greg Woolwand, who was doing the art on games like Solid Skier and just such beautiful striking art, and Eirik Surka, who had done the soundtrack for Super Crate Box for us. We got this team together. We started working on it, and it was such a good collaboration. It was lovely. And then about 6 months in, when we were making real progress, we got an email from the friend that we had made that free game for earlier, right, for that Kickstarter, Gungod. And he sent us a screenshot of a game, and it was just a copy, straight up a copy of our game. It was just more cutesy art, and instead of a guy on a boat with guns, you were a ninja on a boat. Beyond that, exact same game, same upgrades, same progression. They even stole the progression ratio. Everything was cloned. And they were going to launch next week. And we were months out. We weren't done with our game. We wanted to make our game better. We had been improving. They had seen Radical Fishing and cloned it. So we got into a panic mode, and we decided to announce our game, announce Ridiculous Fishing, which we hadn't done yet because we wanted to keep it a secret and a surprise. We negotiated with that company to delay the launch of their game because we thought it was kind of scummy that they would steal somebody else's game design and then release that. And then they basically said, now we're releasing it. They made $1 million in no time. They were praised for their innovative and original game design. And we paused the project. I burned out immediately because it turned out for 3.5 years, I had been burning myself out, but things had been going so well that, you kind of keep going. You've got that momentum, you're running. So even though you're tired, you kind of keep moving forward. But yeah, I cannot express how scary it is to have spent your entire life wanting to make games. And then one day, you get that email and the burnout hits, and you boot up your computer and you stare at the cursor blinking on the screen. And every time you stare at that cursor, it feels like your head is splitting in two, right? Because this had been my life since that little boy was playing chess. I wanted to be a game designer. I'd worked for it for 15, 16 years, programming, modding, going to school, having a success game, being an award-nominated game designer. And then I screwed up. In 3 years' time, I messed it up. I go for it, but I work too hard, and now I can't work anymore. And it's probably the scariest thing. In terms of my creative career, it's probably the scariest thing that has happened, where you just realize, if I do this again, if I push my body, if I push my brain too far, I might lose the ability to do this job that I love. So getting over that burnout was really rough. Took me 6 to 8 months. We weren't making any money, and we were honestly saved by a tiny studio in Canada called Halfbot that offered to port Super Crate Box to iOS. And that brought in just enough money to keep the studio afloat. And then we did our big revenge tour.
Exactly. Ridiculous Fishing, yeah? It was released to iOS in March 2013, right?
Right. So for the next 2 years, as we were dealing with this clone, we did public speaking on it. I wrote I was so angry. I wrote to everybody, even things that would never write about video games. I wrote to the New York Times. I wrote to the Washington Post. I wrote to everybody. These people are stealing our game. This is a real problem. Creativity is no longer rewarded. And it turned out all of them wrote about it. We were in the New York Times, we were in the Washington Post, we were in all of these big newspapers all around the world. Articles I couldn't read, and I didn't even know where they had read the story. And the industry just sort of galvanized around us. They became they agreed that this was not what it should be, that creativity should be rewarded. And this was a more naive games industry back in 2013, absolutely. But to get over ourselves, we made Luftrausers, which was a really angry airplane game because we were really angry and we didn't want to work on Ridiculous Fishing really angry. So we put all the anger into a different game and launched that game. That was a major success. We worked with Devolver again on that one because I couldn't launch 2 games at once. And then Ridiculous Fishing came out. And Ridiculous Fishing was... My life before and after Ridiculous Fishing is 2 different lives, right? The life before Ridiculous Fishing is the story of a kid who played chess when he was 5 and grew up with poor parents, always had like the hand-me-down computer, really trying to find a way to do this thing. And the day after Ridiculous Fishing, I was a game studio, right? I was a game studio. I had resources. I could hire people. I could buy a good computer. I could get my mom an iPad. I could not have to borrow a testing phone for my next build from the company that was across the door from us. We were a game studio. Like, we had money. We could pay salary. It was wild. It was different. And I went to JW, to my co-founder, to Jan Willem, and I said, listen, we have a lot of money now. Over the years before that, before Ridiculous Fishing came out, I'd done some public speaking, because in the Netherlands, if you get your game in the press, only 15 million people read Dutch. Nobody else reads Dutch. So if I got the game in the best press in the Netherlands, barely anybody would care, right? So I needed to get my game in the English press. But I didn't know anybody in the English press because I hadn't met anybody in the English press. So I decided I needed to go to London. But this was before Ridiculous Fishing came out, so I had no money. So somebody had told me that public speaking will pay for your ticket. So I flew to England. I spoke in the Netherlands. An organizer that saw me in the Netherlands invited me to England, flew me to England. I gave a talk in England. They could only afford the flight there, not the flight back. So I was stuck in England for 2 weeks until I figured out the money to go back home. That's apparently extremely illegal, and you shouldn't do that. You have to have a return flight. That got out of hand. Somebody at the UK program was a US event organizer, and they invited me over, and then my talk just kept going. People wanted to hear these talks, and at some point I started getting these invites from these amazing places. I started getting these invites from Brazil, from Uruguay, from Indonesia, from India, from Tunisia, from all around the world, and they would all go like, "Rami, can you come speak?" I'm like, "Yeah." Can you pay for the flight? And they're like, "No." I'm like, "I can't either. I can't, like, what happens?" And they're like, "Well, then we can't do it." So when Ridiculous Fishing came out, I went to Jan Willem and I said, "Okay, listen, we made a lot of money. I want to take whatever part of the money that is mine, right? And I want to go to every place that has invited me. And I want to go speak there. I want to go meet those people. And I don't care if I have to pay for all of it. I want to go." So I did that. And I did that. It took 1.5 years to go to everywhere that had invited me. And by that point, it had grown even further. So now I was getting invited to speak at a different event every 3 days, somewhere else in the world, sometimes different continents every 3 days.
That's
and
great.
I did that for 7 years.
Wow. I'm passing the microphone now to Asi to take you into the next stage of your career.
Thank you so much, Renard. And Rami, I came late, so I didn't say hi.
A pleasure.
Obviously, we have a good history. I still remember that we met at GDC when we the beginning, when I started to run Games for Change.
Right.
You and Sarah came to introduce yourselves, and I was like, wow, an indie developer that really cares about Games for Change. That's wow, and since then we did some things together, obviously more bringing your view and your talent. And one thing that I remember in particular, that you curated an exhibition of games by non-English speaking developers. You basically went and found those games that many times are underserved, underexposed, right?
Exactly. Yeah. That was, and thank you, by the way, for making that space, because nobody cared enough to make that space. It was Games for Change that really made that space available.
I remember games in Farsi and
we had games in all sorts of languages. It was really phenomenal. Probably the first time the industry was really made aware of the language barrier. So again, thank you.
So look, this is a great segue and great context for some of the questions I want to ask you, because maybe the first question I'll ask you, there is all this amazing contribution that you're doing on the, let's call it ambassadorship, right?
Right.
And you even got the Choice Award,
right?
to cement it, to make it official. But there's all this effort, and you're doing there's a list of things that I can and will ask you about, but how do you balance it with being a creator?
Right.
I mean, obviously that's a contribution. You just talked about 7 years of talks. How does it, do you sleep? Do you sleep really?
I do. I might have not slept enough for part of it, but I think for me, I think this goes back to my father. What I talked about earlier is this idea that I can make one game or I can help 100 people make one game. And if I can help 100 people make one game, really I've helped 100 games come to exist, right? So I think for me, Vlaambir has sort of been a part-time thing for quite a few years now for me before we shut it down back in 2020. Because I feel like things are still too unfair for me to be comfortable with, right? Like it's still not even enough to be comfortable with how the industry is. And I want to make games. I can't not make games, right? The creative part of me has to create. I get very sad. And
it's your expression, obviously.
Exactly. If I have thoughts or things I want to express, if there is, it always comes out in the form of a game mechanic or a story or a writing or anything that I'm good at. I can't do music, so it doesn't come out in music ever. But photography, video, games, writing, it has to come out some way. So I've always sort of taken it as I've taken Vlaambir mostly as a producer programmer, where flying is honestly a great place to program because even though you don't have access to Stack Overflow, you do have access to your brain. Which is nice. So I've always sort of approached it as a programmer, and then whenever I would be stable on the ground, I would approach it as business/marketing, which I felt was really important. Yeah. The lucky thing about the work I was doing was that
you mean the idea that the two parts are basically feeding each other, that the fact that you're out there also helping the business.
Exactly. So the fortunate thing about it was that Vlaambir as a game studio, the games we made were never made for gamers. The games we made were always made for developers, right? Yeah. It was always like, look at this clever thing, right? Look at this weird design. Like that was what we were making. We were never making games for like gamers that would they happen to like our games. But what we were really doing is we were kind of like bragging to other developers with most of our work. Like, look at this thing. Like, isn't that cool? So the fact that I was out there talking to developers meant that we were also gaining audience. We were gaining exposure. We were gaining access to press. So it kind of fed into each other. Without Vlaambir, I would never have been able to do the travel. But without the travel, I would have never been able to do Vlaambir. So it kind of became the same thing. And at some point, and this is a conversation I had to have with Jan Willem, at some point, me became bigger than Vlaambir.
Yeah.
In a strange way.
The brand, your own brand.
The brand of Rami became bigger than Vlaambir, and that became sort of an issue because obviously I still needed to sell games to be able to continue doing the travel. I was still funding a lot of it myself, and Game Dev World, which was an event that we announced at Games for Change as well. That was also funded out of pocket, right? So I needed to sell games to do the things I do. So it was always sort of a bit of a tightrope act, trying to figure out, can I put more work here or will that tip the scales too far?
And you feel it's still the case? It's still the kind of a balancing act?
Yeah, I mean, so since Vlaambir, since Vlaambir sort of shut down in 2020 and we both decided to do our own thing, it's still that same balancing act, right? Even though my brand is now consolidated as Rami Ismail, and I have future games plans, and there will be news, and there's still some Vlaambir stuff happening.
You're still young, and
there's time, hopefully, but because of that, I think the balancing act remains. Like I need to balance my commercial activities with the other activities. But it's been interesting. It's been really, I'm now doing consultancies, like free and consultancies for people from emerging territories and paid consultancies for people from elsewhere. I've talked to 250 developers since last October, which is more than 40 developers a month, help them out with their issues.
And also you have those templates and tools that you distribute and kind of one-on-one press and communication things.
Right, things like press kit, which is, that's the thing I'm most known for.
Yeah, really?
It's press kit. Yeah, I was surprised. I always, as part of figuring out my new brand, I went and researched, like, what do people know me for? It's press kit. Most people know me for press kit. They kind of, like, some know that I'm Vlambeer, some don't know that I'm Vlambeer. Some people know me from my talks, some people don't know me from my talks. Almost every developer uses press kit, which is wild.
Interesting.
Even larger ones. No Man's Sky uses press kit.
Wow.
A lot of other, like, major AA games use press kit, and my name is at the bottom of all of those pages. So a lot of press emails me with, like, aren't you the developer of No Man's Sky? I'm like, no, I made the page that they're using to promote it. Like, that's
template,
it. Yeah. Right.
Rami, I want to ask you one more maybe question. I mean, obviously, I think Varied and Renard, we could do it probably for 2 hours. It's fascinating. And I want to ask you one more question, then maybe we'll open to the audience. As I hope that you can give us a bit more time post the hour. But we're talking about this activity that obviously we opened now that is beyond being the creator. Let's talk about the goals, objectives. So maybe it's a tough question, I don't know, but there are a lot of things that you're focusing on, from what we talked about, getting people access when they're not English speakers, that you feel there's a huge bias of the Western world. I mean, GDC, it's in the US. Can you get there? How tough it is to get there? Then Trump is coming and even changing the rules to be stricter and harsher. There are things that you look at in terms of representation of Muslim and Arab culture in games and movies, right? I see it all the time on Twitter. I have to admit I enjoy it because it does open a whole different perspective.
Right.
But the question is, in terms of priorities, like if you needed to say what's the biggest pain, what the biggest thing you want to solve right now in the gaming industry in that sense?
If somebody once asked me, Rami, if you had a magic wand and you could change one thing about the world, right, what would you change? And I remember what I said because I still think it's true. I said, I would remove English from the world. That's it. I would just remove no more English and then figure out how we communicate from there. Because I think
France.
Right. But I think one of the issues that we have is everything around us defaults to one language, right? The programming tools are in English, the communication is in English, the events are in English. So much, this conversation is in English. And it opens opportunity, but it also obviously shuts opportunities elsewhere.
Sure.
And the language barrier to me has been the most, in my travels, I noticed that was really the barrier, right? Yes, there's the economic barrier, but the economy is relatively, like if you're in a country with a weak economy and you can get a $30,000 investment, that's a huge amount of money. You can run a studio with that. And you can look at Poland with the CD Projekt.
For sure.
And with a relatively weak economy, they managed to scale really rapidly and build a huge studio.
Look, I see it in India today.
In India, same thing, right? So around the world, you see that a weaker economy is not necessarily a blocker to industry access. It's language. It's being able to comfortably participate in our economy and in our resources, in our knowledge. So for me, I believe that games, and I think we spoke about this earlier when Virat asked a question about this, about my mom. I believe games are a language, right? And they're a very unique language in that you don't need to be able to speak to each other to play with each other, right? Put a ball on the ground, kick it to somebody else. They'll kick it back. Doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, what your background is, how old you are. Like, if you can return the ball, you will return the ball, right? And what I find fascinating about that is that we've all sort of accepted that games are a global language and that everybody can hear it. For me, the problem is not everybody can speak it.
Yeah.
And it's not because they don't want to speak it. It's because they don't have the opportunity to speak it. So in my ambassador work, that's my focus. Like, how can we get everybody to speak? I don't care where they're from. I don't care what their background is. I just want people to equally have access to this wonderful medium to tell their stories, to tell their experiences, to share the joy. So I think that's my focus. Obviously, like that breaks down into representation, marginalization, language barriers, economics, structure, politics. Like, you know, everything touches everything when you're talking about
it's like you wear the special glasses that you see all those things that people are just used to see all the time, and they glance over.
It's so. I mean, I think you've traveled extensively. Like when you see game development in countries where you sit down and you talk to the team and they're like, yeah, we print our code. And you're like, why do you print your code? They're like, well, the power goes out for 2 weeks sometimes. And you're like,
yeah.
And you're still a programmer? And they're like, yeah. You can't see the games industry the same way anymore, right? You can't, it's just impossible. So for me, the traveling has been the greatest gift, I think, of my life, to see all these cultures and to realize that the world isn't that simple. It isn't black, white, good, bad, whatever. It's people trying their best within the framework of the world they've been given. I just think that no matter what that framework is, people should have access to games as a medium. That very frequently includes people that I don't like making games, or games that I wish would not existing. But I think if there is space to create art, there also has to be space to criticize it and to think about what we are bringing into the world. So
right.
It's been a very fun 10 years. I think I feel less smart now than I did when I started. Because when I started, I thought
you saw so much.
Yeah, you start and you're like, I know how to do QBasic. I can program, and now I'm like,
you know how much you don't know. Yeah.
I have no idea what anybody is doing.
Right.
So Renaud is actually developing, is one of the only Israeli developers who develops games in Hebrew.
In Hebrew.
So, yeah,
nice.
You have many things in common.
So Vera, maybe it's a good segue to go back to you guys.
Yeah,
either you have other questions or maybe open it.
Before
thank you so much, Rami.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
We want to open the discussions to the audience. If there are any questions, I wonder how we can do this with Zoom, actually. But let's just try. If there's we have time for about 2 or 3 questions. Is there anyone who wants to ask a question? You can just ask in the chat and just say your name.
Zoom.
Okay,
Zoom
Leonid. Yeah, there you go, Leonid. You can ask questions.
Can I ask it vocally or should I type it in?
Just say it, I guess. We can hear you now.
Hello, Rami. I've been a huge fan since
Thank you.
Random encounter.
Thank you.
Thing you've done with the combat system there.
Right.
So
Thank you.
previously you were talking about burnout. So I was thinking to myself, as a creative person, how do you, okay, you obviously cannot avoid it, but how do you get out of this burnout?
Right.
So you told it's been like 6 months.
Yeah. So at first I tried to fix it. At first I tried all sorts of exercises and I don't know what, like I tried to like force myself to go do work once a week or twice a week. And I think it didn't get better until I gave up. I just kind of gave up. I just didn't work for a while. I went and did some other things. I learned to ride a bicycle again. I just started doing other stuff. And I knew the company was going out of business, but I also knew that anything I tried to do about it would not work because I literally couldn't do anything. I was useless in that regard. So I just kind of gave up. And then after 2 or 3 weeks of rest, I found that I could work a little bit again. I opened up my computer and I didn't like die of pain. So I think for me, I think for most people I've talked to about burnout, the trick is in accepting that you have a burnout and accepting that means you can't do work. I think a lot of creatives and a lot of programmers specifically have a very, here's a problem, how do I fix it attitude towards things. And it turns out our body isn't programming code. It's body. It's these interconnected systems that are unpredictable, but that exhaust. They get tired. They break if you don't take care of them. So I had to stop seeing it as a production issue and start seeing myself as a human body that was just done with things for a while. And then when I did that, it slowly came back. But there's no shortcut as far as I know. You have to rest. You have to take time away. And mentally, that will be hard because you will stress about the fact that you're not doing anything. So then you have to get over that part to actually start healing. That's been my experience.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you. Any more? Anyone else?
Also, thanks for the kind words about Serious Sam, the random encounters combat system. We are very proud of that one.
No, it was great. It was very unusual. I'm a huge fan of Serious Sam, but what you have done with combat system is amazing.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Okay, Alan.
Hi, Rami. I wanted to get your input on, it's a little loaded, it's kind of a loaded question, but I wanted to know how would you approach not only violence in video games, but the whole idea of war in video games. I know there's this conspiracy, this controversy on 6 Days in Fallujah and all the war games like Call of Duty and Battlefield, and there's this game like Spec Ops: The Line. I don't know if you know it, but it actually treats war like in a really good way of like showing the horrors of that. So I just wanted to get your input on it.
I think part of us has to, part of it is that we have to accept that games is a medium and that medium has blockbusters and that blockbusters will very rarely treat anything with the respect or care that it deserves. That's part of the medium. I think the reason 6 Days for me has been sort of a flashpoint is that it pretends to be a documentary. And that's where it becomes a little troublesome because it's not, right? It's an entertainment product. That has been created with the purpose of entertaining and telling things from a very specific perspective. I'm obviously critical of a lot of these games, and a lot of them specifically take place in sort of this fictionalized Middle East, where like just only terrorists live, and that has bothered me for a long time because you have to imagine as a Dutch Egyptian kid growing up, realizing that every game you play the characters that look like your Dutch friends and you shoot the characters that look like your Arab friends. At some point you start noticing that and you start going like, that seems weird. Why does that keep happening? So I don't think games are incapable of discussing difficult topics like that, right? Spec Ops: The Line is a great example. A German-made game about aggression in war and the traumas that come with fighting a war, even if you're on the winning side. A Polish game like This War of Mine, which treats war very much from the perspective of survivors and civilians, because Poland doesn't go to war. War comes to Poland. But the US very consistently from their culture makes games about winning wars because culturally that is the fingerprint of media and the treatment of war in a lot of US popular media. So I think there's absolutely possibility to discuss difficult topics like war, but if you, in general, and I don't want to generalize, but in general, a US game will be made from a US cultural perspective. And this is one of the most beautiful things about games that I've learned is that as you travel the world, you realize that every country, every culture, every people has their fingerprint, right? I think personally, I'm just a little tired of the US fingerprint on war games. Like, I know American Sniper exists. I know like Black Hawk Down is a thing, Apocalypse Now. Like we've watched the stories of the US soldiers going to a place, killing lots of people and then being sad about it. Like I've seen that one. Like I want to see other ones. And I think for me, the fact that there is so much space for the one, but not space for the other is a bigger failure than the fact that we're making war games, because I think we can make really impactful war games as a medium. I think we can really say powerful things in games that you can't say in other media well. So I would welcome a 6 Days in Fallujah that properly explores all sides of that conflict, right? That properly explores the stories of people there. I would love that. Please, somebody make that game. But the game where you go in, shoot a bunch of brown people, and then we talk about how sad that is. I've played that one. I'm good.
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
Thank you.
It's a challenge. We have time for one more question. So Alon.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
So first of all, thanks a lot for the talk. It's been amazing.
Thank
you. Speaking of games that have an impact, what is your opinion about games that talk about mental illness, for example? Because that is a topic that is like criminally underrepresented in games, and if it is represented, it's in such a horrible way.
Right.
That I think there's games that can be a positive impact on that.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I think games honestly, Asi is one of the best people to speak to about this in the industry, because he's been championing this sort of game for a long time. I think the industry, there is an impetus to make these games. There's a creative impetus to make these games. Like, people want to tell these complex stories, these personal stories, these stories that are not always comfortable and not always pleasant, but are so part of the human condition and of life and of reality for many or most of us. That I think the challenge is less in whether we should tackle those things. Obviously, we should tackle those things. I think a lot of it is that making games like that comes at tremendous expense, personally, right? You have to dive into things that are painful, or that might be the cause of trauma, or the cause of being targeted by non-minority folks. It very quickly turns you into an icon for a cause. And I think a lot of people are scared of being an icon for a cause, and justifiably so. Like, minorities are traditionally not treated super well in the games industry, or not even in the games industry, in games at large, in the field of games at large. So when it comes to things like mental illness, I think there is groups of developers very bravely taking on that topic. What we need as an industry is support for those kinds of folks making those games. And we need support beyond, we'll retweet the game, right? We need support in that people are mentored, in that people have funding, and that people get to iterate on those ideas. Because one thing I believe is that when people represent a minority view, they're usually one of the few doing that, which means that the expectations for that representation are extremely high, right? If I'm going to make the first game in which X sort of personality trait or cultural history is portrayed, and it's the only one, then anybody who doesn't fit that is going to be upset at that representation, or is going to be disappointed by that representation. So we need more space for work like that, for personal work like that. We need funding for work like that. We need mentorship for work like that. And I think as an industry, and we need showcases for work like that. I think as an industry, we're slowly building towards that, and it's not going fast enough, and it's not going equally enough, and it's never, because it can never go fast enough. But the fact that we're seeing this much work done on physical disability, for example, right now, that was unimaginable a few years ago, that accessibility will be such a large part of game design nowadays. And it is my hope that every 3 years we'll look at the industry and be like, wow, can you imagine that this is now just a thing? I think the industry wants to be better. I'm not sure the economics always allow for it. That's kind of
yeah.
That's how it is.
Right. Thanks a lot for the answer.
Yeah, but if you are, if I just can add, if you are doing work in that space and there's any way I can help, let me know.
I will. Thank you.
Good.
Fantastic. I know there are more people who want to ask you questions, but unfortunately our time is nearly up. Before wrapping up, we wish to do an homage to a wonderful 10 questions format. These 10 questions originally came from a French series. It was called, I hope I pronounce it right, Bouillon de Culture. Renard Demieux, you brought it down. It was hosted by Renard Pivot. They are better known as the questions that James Lifton asked every guest at the end of the Inside Actor Studio. If anyone has ever watched it, it was a wonderful show. I know you will be amazed at how much they reveal about a person's insights, feelings, and beliefs. So Rami, it's going to be quick and fast,
Okay.
Okay, bullet questions.
All right.
One, what is your favorite word?
Sonder with an S at the start. It's the world, the feeling of recognizing that everybody around you is as complex and full of life as you are yourself.
Okay, what is your least favorite word?
This is going to be a controversial one. Diversity. I really hate the word diversity. I think it doesn't capture what we're going for, which is inclusivity. I don't like the idea that we can checkbox our way through. This is now represented. This is now represented. I think inclusivity should be our goal. Anybody could be represented.
I could have talked for hours about this. Yes. What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Contrast. Things juxtaposed against each other, I think for me is a lot of my ideas and inspiration come from that. It shows in my travel as well. Going from one place to the other place is always when I have my best ideas.
Okay, what turns you off?
Pretty much everything else.
Okay.
Like it's been a problem with COVID because I'm just sitting at home doing the same day in, day out. And I've really had to look for ways to create contrast back in my life.
What is your favorite curse word?
It's not actually a curse word, but I use it as a curse word a lot. And even then it's not really a curse word. I use the Arabic astaghfirullah, which is...
say it again slowly.
Astaghfirullah, which is basically God forgive us, but you can kind of use it in place of curse words because you don't want to say the curse word. So it's sort of like a bleep.
We have it too in Hebrew. We have it too in Hebrew. We say the same thing. Yes.
Right. It's really nice because you can just kind of say that, and then the other person knows, like, oh, you're going to say some bad things, and I just really like the.
And it also probably gets different context in different sentences. You know?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's fun. It's absolutely not a curse word, but you can definitely communicate that you're very upset about something with it, which I like.
Okay. What sound or noise do you love?
Very predictable. Airplane engine.
Okay. What sound or noise do you hate? Quickly.
Yeah, I'm thinking. You know the sound of when things stop, when something is happening and it stops. There's sort of like this echo of activity. I really hate that echo of activity because it always means something has happened that is bad or like it's the sound of sound fading, if that is a...
It's not silence, though.
It's not silence. It's the transition. It's the transition to silence. It's a very... I'm sure everybody could recognize it if they heard it, but like it's when a busy building and everybody suddenly stops for a reason. I hate that sound. I've heard it too often in my life. I hope I never hear it again.
Okay.
Amen.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I would like to be an Uber driver.
Okay. I thought it would be, what profession would you not like to do?
Game designer. No.
We got you in a very specific time in your life, I guess.
Right. Pilot. I really wanted to be a pilot when I was growing up, and now I realize that I would not like to do that as a job. I would like to do that as a hobby if I can.
Okay, and last one, if heaven exists, what would you like to God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
You were pretty helpful, weren't you? I think that's it. I think if somebody once asked me, what do you want to be? And apparently my answer was helpful. And I think they meant, what job do you want to do? But it turns out I don't really care what job it is as long as I can help people. So you were pretty helpful and make me pretty happy.
Well, thank you so much. That was pretty helpful. Very helpful.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So thank you so much, Rami Ismail. It was a pleasure having you here, and we do hope that we're going to see you again in Tel Aviv or
hopefully.
Yes. We do have your contact, right? And
yeah, if anybody has any questions, any follow-ups, anything they didn't get to ask but they wanted to ask, if you are on Twitter, find me at THA_Rami. You can DM me with your questions, or if you want, there is a pinned tweet that allows you to book a 20-minute phone call for free with me. So if you have any follow-up questions, if there's anything you really wanted to know but you weren't comfortable asking here or talking about here, or we didn't have time, ping me there and we'll figure things out.
Fantastic. Okay, so have a good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rami.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
Bye. Salam.
Thank you.
Salam.
Salam.